Jack.
Oh, hey, Zach.
What you doing?
Well, you know, just trying to practice those chords you taught me.
Mind if I join you?
Be my guest.
Why don't you start that from the chorus?
Okay. 3, 4.
Lay your burdens down. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Yeah, nice. Good job. All right.
Cool. Yeah, nice harmonies.
Yeah. Why don't you start from the verse?
No, I'd really rather not.
No, come on. Just go ahead. Start from the verse. I don't know why you're so afraid.
All right. You sure?
There you go. You got it.
Sometimes on this journey, I don't really want to.
Come on. I'm here with you. I'll help you. We'll get it right.
Right.
Yeah. I can show you. What?
Sometimes on this journey, I get bored in the house, and I'm in the house bored.
No, hey, no. That's not
I thought it
appropriate.
was funny.
Yeah, it's not appropriate. We shouldn't be singing that song.
I don't know. I'm just kind of not that into it now since you've shown up.
Since I've shown up.
Kind of annoyed, to be honest.
Annoyed? What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know. It's just, you're kind of an annoying guy.
What?
And
Me?
I was kind of liking figuring it out on my own without you breathing down my neck.
Excuse me. You'd be nowhere without me. Where's this all coming from?
Zach, it's no secret now. I'm the new favorite.
Whoa.
This is my town.
Oh, really?
Okay.
I don't think so. That's not.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Feel what way?
Hey, can you do the announcements today? I don't really feel like
The announcement. But you love doing the announcements.
I've been there, done that now, though. So.
Oh, so you're too cool for it now?
Rather, not.
But, well, we had it scheduled to do it today. Can you just tell them?
You can tell them that.
Well, but tell them about like the catch that phrase, the Instagram, like fill it
You
out.
can tell them that too.
But this is the thing that you like. They need to know to submit their phrases for the lesson.
No, I'm kind of done right now. Okay, bye.
Fine. Never needed you anyway. Thank you all for being here, even though he's not happy to be here.
When we want to know how to do something, most of us go and Google it or YouTube it. Things like how to get in shape, how to unsend a text, or maybe how to do the Christian renegade. But there are some things that don't have a simple solution or how-to video. Things like what to do when you have a problem with family, or when it seems like you have no control in a situation, or what to do when someone has done something to you. Some things just aren't easy to find online. So what do you do when you don't know what to do?
Good morning, everybody. I want to know what some of your all-time favorite movies are. And there's a reason I'm asking this question. So put your favorite movie in the comments, or a favorite if you can't narrow it down. I understand. There are so many good ones to choose from. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I love movies. I like to analyze them and study how they make the movies and all that kind of stuff. But one of the most powerful tools in making a movie is not the visual effects. It's not the way that they can just make superheroes fly through the sky, smash through buildings, and do all the cool things and put it in slow motion all at the same time. Those things are great, and they add to the movie. They're special effects, but the great movies don't need those. What makes a movie great is the characters. And one of the best gauges to be able to tell whether or not a movie is good or not is how much you are able to connect to or like the characters. The producer's job is to create characters that show you both the good and the bad parts from a character's life. It makes you feel for the character, makes you be able to either relate with them or just understand what they're going through, or just root for them all the more because you know everything about them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's what makes characters appealing when you can see all the good and the bad parts from their lives. Seeing all those rough edges helps us to like the characters and actually care about what happens to them in the end of the story. And one of the best tools that movie makers give us when they're showing us about a character's life is they give a character a backstory. It's a way that you can understand what has happened in a character's life before what is currently happening. So it gives you a better understanding of what's currently happening in front of you in the movie by understanding what has happened in this character's past. So for example, maybe a movie centers around a dad that is trying to rescue his daughter. But their backstory shows us that they had a lot of brokenness in the relationship in the past, which means a lot is at stake for him to be able to rescue her and restore their relationship. Maybe their last words to each other were not things that they were proud of. And it makes you feel for the characters. You have to be able to let the dad save her so that they can have that moment there where they restore their relationship. Or maybe the movie centers around a superhero trying to defeat his greatest enemy, but you look at the backstory in that superhero and that villain used to be very close. And it brings so much more tragedy and elements of complications to the story. It makes you feel for both sides and actually care about what happens in the end. Understanding the backstory helps make the overarching story much more compelling. And sometimes, if we're honest, if you're watching a movie, sometimes those backstory elements seem a little bit random. They seem like, there's this big action scene going on, but then it cuts to like this slower scene and a flashback to where maybe they were in the kitchen and like they're getting in an argument, and you're like, wait, what does this have to do with the actual story? Get back to the action. What's going on right now? And it seems random, it seems like it doesn't make sense, but as the story unfolds and you put the pieces together, you start to realize that those little seemingly random elements of the story and of the backstory start to make a whole lot more sense and make the movie have like a wow moment at the end when it all comes together. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe you're even thinking of a movie or two right now that you weren't expecting what was going to happen or to feel the way that you felt when you got to the end of the story because it tied in all those loose ends from the backstory with what was currently going on. But the reality is maybe you've had moments in your life where you feel the exact same way as when you're watching a movie and those random moments come on in those flashbacks. You're like, what does this have to do with anything? What's going on? Maybe there's real moments in your real life where stuff is happening and you're thinking, wait, why is this happening? Why me? What is the purpose of what is happening right now? And just to be clear, we're talking about difficulties, pain, suffering, the struggle. When we're in the middle of those things, we look at those and we're like, why is this happening? It seems random. It doesn't seem to make sense. There doesn't oftentimes seem to be a point to the difficulties. It's a difficulty. Why do I have to go through this? Like when you're trying to get through high school and graduate so you can go to college and move on with the rest of your life, right? School seems so pointless and meaningless at the time, but you look back later and it actually, the work that you had to go through to get to where you are actually helped shape you and define you and help you become the person that you are. And at the time in our lives, the difficult things seem to have no point. And it can be really frustrating. They're the things that will be a part of our backstory one day, but right now they're part of our current story, and we don't understand the point. And for the past few weeks, we've been talking through this question, what to do when you don't know what to do. Today, we're talking about what to do when you're going through difficulties, when people make fun of you, when a friend dies, when your learning disability seems to make everything much worse and much more complicated, when your parents are going through a difficult divorce and it's killing you, when your self-harm habit begins to get a little bit out of control, or maybe when someone you love gets really sick. There's plenty of examples I could choose from, but the point is, what do you do with this stuff, the heavy stuff, the real stuff, the painful stuff that we encounter in life? In the midst of difficulties, what do you do when it all seems so random and meaningless? Difficulties often feel random, meaningless, or unnecessary. And it's common, so if you feel that way or if you've been that way before, just know you're not alone. But sometimes we're able to look back on our backstory and see the bigger picture and get the point. For example, maybe you had a friendship that just died out and you look back on it and you realize actually that friend was probably not the best influence on you and led you into making some decisions you regretted. And looking back, now you're kind of glad you're not friends with that person anymore. But at the time, going through that divide in your friendship, it just seemed difficult and unnecessary and really hurtful. Sometimes though, you're able to see the point in the middle of the difficulty. Maybe you get called out in practice because you didn't know your stuff. You didn't prepare, you didn't put the effort in, and so you're dragging the rest of the team down. And calling you out was painful and felt a little unnecessary, but at the same time, you saw the point and you whipped your butt back into shape and you got serious about your role on the team. It's great when you can see the point of the difficulty while you're in the midst of the difficulty, but as we've discussed, that's not always the case. So what do you do when difficulties come and you don't know the point? Because being real, most of the time, things that don't feel good seem to have no point. And that's just the reality of life. I felt that way, I know you have. But what's worse is in real life, unlike the movies, most of our difficult circumstances don't get a pretty little bow tied onto it that we're able to walk away from and see, look what that situation did. I mean, sometimes that can happen, but oftentimes it doesn't, and it doesn't look quite as pretty as it does in the movies. And so we sometimes question the validity of what we've gone through. It makes us question a lot of things, from is God real to what is God trying to do in my life? Is He even with me? But when we're confused or going through difficult times, it helps to look to people who have already been through similar situations or who have been through a difficult time themselves to understand how we can move forward. And that's where we're going to pick back up with Joseph's story this week. So just as a recap, since we didn't actually have our meeting last week because of student takeover, which if you haven't seen that, make sure you go back and watch it. It was a lot of fun. But to give you the backstory to where we are today, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and rejected by his family. Then he was taken to a foreign country and forced to work in the house of a high-powered official. Then he was wrongly accused and thrown into prison for something that he didn't even do. From free man to slave to prisoner, if anybody had a right to ask, why me, what's the point, it was Joseph. And that's where we're going to pick up today, where Joseph is in prison for something that he didn't even do, but he begins to meet some new friends. So let's check out where the story picks up today. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. So Pharaoh's the big bad, he's the boss. If you make him mad, you're in trouble. You're either dead or he's throwing you in prison. And back in these times, there was no trial. You didn't have to do anything illegal to get thrown into prison. I mean, the cupbearer's job was just to pour his drink, make sure it wasn't poison, and the chief chef was just to cook things and help Pharaoh become thicker than a Snicker. But apparently they had done something that upset Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh throws them into prison, and he can do that without legal cause. He can just do it because he's Pharaoh and it wasn't a democracy. So here they are with Joseph, and on with the story. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So there's a lot happening here. We're going to skip over some of the details, but basically here Joseph is in prison and he makes these new friends and he is still honoring God. In this time and in this part of the world, dreams are a very important thing about a person's life. If you have a dream, it's usually for a purpose. It needs interpretation and to understand what the gods are trying to tell you, or maybe what the God is trying to tell you, which is what's happening in this case. And Joseph he's got a history with the dreams, and he actually can interpret them. And so he knows that God has given him this gift. And so he says, hey, actually, nobody can interpret this because all interpretations actually belong to God. He's giving God the credit and the honor. And so the men tell Joseph their dreams, and Joseph begins to interpret it for them. And the cupbearer, his dream meant that he was going to be restored back to a favorable place in the king's palace. Yay! But for the baker, not so much. His luck was a little bit worse. In fact, his dream meant that he was going to be killed. Well, sure enough, Joseph's interpretation of those dreams came true, and you'd think that the cupbearer, who was restored back to his place in the palace, would have remembered Joseph and would have been like, oh, hey, yo, Pharaoh, there's this guy I met in prison, and you should put him on your staff because he can interpret dreams like no one I've ever seen before, and he could come in handy to you someday. But no, he doesn't do that. He actually forgets about Joseph. Cool, bro. So over time, you can imagine Joseph is probably sitting in jail, tempted to be thinking, what was the point of all of that? I thought maybe God brought me here for a purpose to help interpret dreams for these people, and maybe God would have another use for me. But then here we find Joseph 2 years later, and he is still rotting in the same cell, in the same prison, wondering what God is doing in his life. Why me? But wouldn't you know it, the story continues, and sure enough, Pharaoh ends up having some pretty nasty dreams that he doesn't know how to interpret, but frighten him to no end, and nobody can seem to interpret the dreams for him. And then, and only then, again, 2 years later, does the cupbearer suddenly remember, holy mother of cheese, Pharaoh, I know a guy who can actually interpret dreams. You should look him up. He's down in the prison cell. Well, so long story short, if you want all the details, I encourage you to go and check them out. It's really worth the read. But Joseph comes up, he interprets Pharaoh's dream, which is that Egypt is going to have a lot of years of plenty and abundance of food and all this stuff, and it's going to be great. But then it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So you better have somebody, that has organizational skills that can be trusted to put in charge of rationing everything to make sure that everybody can survive the famine. See, famines actually were really, 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 really bad because it affected all life. And not just the people, but the animals and the plant life and everything from the cattle down to the tiniest, cutest little turtle. Which, by the way, did you know turtles breathe out their butts? But Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and Pharaoh actually thinks, hey, I think your God is, giving you good insight, and I want you on my staff after all. So he promotes Joseph to be second in command over all of Egypt. No one was more powerful than him except for Pharaoh himself. So after all this time and all those hardships, God was actually able to use those difficult circumstances to position Joseph in a place where he could actually take care and save the entire land and those living in it, including his family, which we'll talk more about next week. But those difficult circumstances positioned Joseph to be able to do something great, something that was of purpose and that he wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. It was something that only he could do. But just because Joseph was elevated to this high position doesn't necessarily mean his life was great and perfect again. He was still under Pharaoh, he was still needed in Egypt, he was still in a foreign land, and therefore not allowed to go back home to see his family, to tell his father that he actually was still alive. So he had to still work through everything that had happened to him and live with the reality of where he was. But the reality and the point of this week's message is that no matter what you've gone through, even the difficult things, they can be the very things that God uses to position you in a place to do something special that only you can do. And remember, just because something bad happens to you doesn't mean that God did it to you or wanted it for you by any means. It just means that we live in a fallen world, and God can take ashes and make them into something beautiful. He can take your bad situations and turn it into something great if you let Him. Because of sin, things happen. Bad things happen. Things that aren't fair. People hurt each other. They create systems of hurt. Doesn't mean that God wanted it, doesn't mean that it was part of His plan, but it does mean that God can take seemingly impossible situations and turn them into something good. And if you're ever wondering if anything good can possibly come from a situation, just remember that God is really good at doing the impossible. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose." Meaning if you're aligning your life with God's word and seeking out his will for your life, no matter what happens, then he can take any situation in your life and turn it into something beautiful if you let him. So ultimately, when you don't know what to do, your problems can position you for a purpose. Doesn't mean you'll always get to see that pretty bow tied on it. Doesn't mean it'll always make sense in the moment. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense in hindsight. We don't understand things this side of heaven. But it does mean that the hardest and worst experiences that happen in our story aren't the end of us or our story. And in fact, they can be used to be a part of something much more. So when we go through pain and we can't see the purpose, there's a couple things I want you to remember. First off, remember that no one has your life story. No one has experienced the things that you have experienced in the order that you've experienced them and in the way that you have experienced them. They may not always be the most fun, but they are unique to you. And God is doing something very specific with you on your journey. God is using your tough stuff and using it to shape you in a way that he's not shaped anybody else. It may not make it easier, but it does give you a perspective and a way to see things a little bit differently. Secondly, remember that your story can interact with others. While nobody else has your story, other people have gone through similar situations. They've gone through similar difficulties, and God can use your story to help make an impact on somebody else going through a difficult situation themselves. Maybe they're able to relate with you because you went through the exact same thing and you're on the other side now. And the opposite is also true. Maybe you're going through something now, but there is somebody ahead of you who has gone through what you're going through now. And they can help you see it from the perspective that is helpful and that God is using in order to shape your story for something quite unique to you. So when you go through family drama, you can go and help others who are going through family drama. When you go through a hard breakup, you can understand what that feels like and be a light and help others who are going through the same thing. You can know probably just what they need to hear and know that they are not alone. When you deal with sickness, illness, or injury, you can know how to help people who are going through the exact same things. When you've had questions and big doubts about your faith, you can be a safe place for other people who are having the same questions and doubts, and you can help them process it in a godly way. You can be a person who looks around and sees other people's struggles and say, hey, me too. I've been there. I know what you're feeling. There's hope. And if you're in the middle of those tough situations and you need somebody to be that for you, guess what? Again, that's why we have small groups, so that we can share this life together, live through it together, and you can have adult mentors in your life pouring into you that can, they've been through stuff, okay? They have life experiences that probably are very similar to what you have gone through. And they're here to help you. They're here to be a safe place for you to talk through those things so that you don't have to process it alone. Joseph went through pain that seemed pointless, but when you look at his backstory, you see that God was at work the entire time. The same is true for your story. What if God could use your painful situation to position you for something that you can't even imagine yet? And what if the first step is simply asking for his help? I love you guys, and we'll catch you next week.
Will, how did you do? Did you catch the phrases this week? The first submission came from Branson.
To cook things and help Pharaoh become thicker than a Snicker.
The second one came from Sophie.
Does the cupbearer suddenly remember Holy Mother of Cheese?
And the last one today came from Kelly.
Which, by the way, did you know turtles breathe out their butts?
Thank you all for submitting those again this week. Got plenty of good ones to choose from. Thank you all again for joining us and tuning in this morning. We'll catch you next week.